Hello, everyone. Here's part two of my career advice for students in general, in particular supply chain management students. I think a lot of this applies to business majors in general. A question I get is, after I graduate and I start working with the company, what should I do while I'm working with the company to build up my credentials? For example, should I get APIC's CPIM certification? I think they're called the Association of Supply Chain Management now. Should I get a certification through the Institute of Supply Management? Should I get lean certification and black belt training? Should I get a graduate degree? Here's my advice there is if you graduate and you start working with a company and you really like the company that you're at, it has long-term potential. You could see yourself being there for a very long time. What I tell my students is look at your boss's resume and look at your boss's resume. In other words, look up the corporate ladder, go on LinkedIn, look at their credentials. What have they done to be successful and climb up the corporate ladder? And I'll be honest with you, there are a lot of companies out there that don't put a lot of value or worth in, for example, APIC's CPIM certification. Maybe culturally, that company places a higher premium on certifications associated with the Institute of Supply Management. I can think of one Fortune 500 company locally that's not headquartered here but has operations in Kalamazoo, where in general, these certifications and credentials don't mean a lot to them. They don't even place a premium on getting a graduate degree. They say, hey, if you want to do these things, we'll pay for it. But if you look at people that have climbed up the corporate ladder, it's not necessarily people that have a graduate degree. It's people that have performed, that have generated results and deliverables. So I think a lot of this stuff, you have to think, all right, long term, am I going to be at this company? And if I'm not at this company, I want a job hop. What does my resume need to look like? And yeah, anytime you can externally validate yourself as a subject matter expert in the field that you're in, like through these certifications. I've never had students that have said, wow, that wasn't worth it, or that was a bad idea. I've had students that have majored in supply chain management and worked in supply chain management and have gone on to get like APIC CPIM certification and say things like, yeah, the process itself, I didn't learn a lot because I already knew a lot of the material. But when I job hopped, that validated me as a subject matter expert, and it was an external validation, so it carried some weight. So those credentials helped them job hop to a higher bidder. But when they were with that one company, it didn't necessarily benefit them. So again, my advice is look at the resumes of the people above you. Figure out culturally what does that organization place a premium on, and then gravitate towards building up those credentials and work experiences. Okay, along the same lines, I have students that come up to me and say, look, I want to make it all the way to the top. I want to be the CEO. I want to be in the C-suites at a Fortune 500 company. Again, the Fortune 500 are America's largest 500 companies based on annual sales revenue. Okay, for example, the largest Fortune 500 company is Walmart because they do over $500 billion in annual sales revenue, and they're also the world's largest company. So there's the Fortune 500 and the Global 500. I think if you look at the Global 500, probably a third of them are American companies. Okay, so if you want to aspire to running organizations like that, ask yourself, what's the common thread? If you look at their resumes, what do they have in common? And there are three general common themes of climbing and advancing up the corporate ladder at these Fortune 500 types, large companies, many of which design and build things. Not entirely, but a lot of them are still companies that actually build stuff. So what do they have in common? They have graduate degrees. So the people in the C-suites, the VPs, and the CEOs of the Fortune 500 tend to have graduate degrees. I'm shocked that in 2022, the data says that a graduate degree still has a phenomenal return on investment. In other words, getting a master's of science in something like finance, getting a master's of science in something like supply chain management, getting an MBA with a concentration in marketing or supply chain management. If you look at getting a graduate degree in something that's business related, the data says you do better professionally. I'm pleasantly shocked and surprised that companies still place a premium on this, and also that you develop skill sets by doing this that translates into deliverables and results that maybe otherwise you wouldn't have had. So 3 common themes of CEOs is 1, they have graduate degrees. Two, the Fortune 500 are huge companies that, yes, while they're headquartered in America, they do business globally. So the second thing that they have in common is that they have overseas work experience. And usually when you work for a Fortune 500 company, initially they're not going to throw a 22-year-old into an overseas permanent job assignment full-time. We're not going to send you to China or Mexico or Germany full-time straight out of school. But if you work in supply chain management, you're going to get that global exposure immediately because you're going to have suppliers that are located globally. And then if a company sees you as a fast tracker or having higher level managerial potential, they will put you in an overseas job assignment as an expatriate where you work someplace permanent full time. And the intention is to bring you back to corporate headquarters so that you can climb up the corporate ladder. So two of the three common themes are they have graduate degrees and they have overseas work experience. There's some American companies, Fortune 500 types, where they do more business outside of America than in America. I'm guessing here, but IBM, Boeing, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, the food companies, consumer products and packaging companies, like Johnson & Johnson and Stryker for medical devices. I'm guessing they do more business outside of America than in America, even though they're American companies headquartered in the United States. So again, it gets back to that graduate degree, like really good ROI. I'm just shocked to see that so many people that advance actually have graduate degrees, because I thought at some point maybe it might have been a little overrated, too expensive. 12 classes, $60,000, but still phenomenal ROI. And then getting that global work experience. And I think early on, you'll get it just by being in supply chain management. You have to travel and go visit a supplier facility, for example. But then longer term, you might get assigned an expat job. Just make sure there's an exit strategy. If they send you to Poland, for example, that it's a 3-year job assignment and that at the end of the 3 years, there's a game plan on paper for when you come back. Otherwise, sometimes expats actually kind of get lost in the shuffle and corporate headquarters forgets about that person that they sent to Poland for a 3-year job assignment at their factory that makes some car for the European car market, for example. Third and final thing that seems to be a common thread, especially of late, is if you want to run a company that designs and builds something, you should probably understand how the product is designed and built. So we're seeing more and more CEOs with technical backgrounds, not necessarily engineers and engineering degrees per se, but they've worked in manufacturing. They've had jobs that require that they interact with engineers. They have degrees in something that require that they take some engineering classes. So big surprise, moving forward, expect more and more CEOs to have supply chain backgrounds. That's where most of their company's costs are. Anytime they want to do something better, faster, and cheaper, chances are the greatest opportunity for doing that is in their supply chain, okay? So if you look at Tim Cook at Apple, kind of a supply chain guy. If you look at Mary Barra at General Motors, kind of a supply chain person. So moving forward, that probably isn't going to change. If anything, we're probably going to see more people in the C-suites and more people that are actually CEOs, or more people interacting with a CFO on a daily basis that have supply chain backgrounds. So again, get a graduate degree, get global work experience, and really develop your technical skills to the extent that you really understand how the product is designed and built, and that you understand manufacturing. So I encourage my students, when they get those job offers from the Fortune 500 types and the company says you're going to be in a job rotation for 2 or 3 years, you're going to have 4 different job assignments, pick which ones you want. Pick the ones where you can learn the most, that are the most important long term, that don't excite you too much. So for a lot of my students, they say, man, I don't want to work in manufacturing, in a factory, in operations and production. And I tell them, but you're working for a manufacturing company. That's the place that consumes the most resources. That's where the job actually gets done. You don't have to be there forever. Just be there for 6 months, a year. Go into a 1-year job rotation, get it out of the way, have it on your resume, and learn as much as you possibly can, so that when you go through your career, you don't hit a ceiling professionally, because all you've done is worked in procurement, purchasing, and sourcing, and all you've done is bought stuff and work with suppliers. I have so many students now that are around 40 that have literally hit that ceiling professionally because they didn't get tons of broad cross-functional work experience. They started in procurement, they stayed there. It's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with being a commodity manager and making $200K a year, but then if you want to advance and you aspire for more, you've set yourself up for hitting that ceiling professionally. There are ways to avoid that, and I'm giving you some of that advice right now. Okay, here's some more career advice, and I don't even know if I can explain this clearly, but I'm going to try. Uh, if you work in a job and you have to deal with your customers, they buy stuff from you, you want them to buy more stuff, or you are going to talk to someone that could be a potential customer. Let's say you're a sales engineer at a first tier supplier and you manage the Toyota business. Toyota is half your business, and you want to see them grow that business, right? Would you agree that whatever information Toyota is looking at when they manage you as their supplier, bare minimum, you should have and look at the information that they're looking at, right? Does that just intuitively make sense? So Toyota's managing you as a supplier, they're your customer. They're looking at information. What are they looking at? Bare minimum, wouldn't you agree that you should be looking at that same information? And that if you could look at more information than they are, more accurate information, more timely information, it's automated, it's correct, it's accurate, that gives you a competitive advantage in managing that relationship and that customer. Likewise, if you're buying stuff from suppliers, if you have the information that they have, if you have the information that they're looking at, or if your information is better, faster, more timely, more automated, that gives you a competitive advantage in managing that relationship with that supplier. Okay, so for example, let's say you're buying parts from a supplier and it has a lot of rubber content. So that supplier has to buy a lot of raw material to make the rubber parts for you. You're paying $1 per part. They come to you and say, our raw material costs are up 50%. We're just gonna have to charge you $1.50. Otherwise, we're not gonna maintain our margins. We're not gonna be able to be profitable on this business. Wouldn't it have been nice if you knew ahead of time that their raw material costs were going up and they were gonna come to you and ask for a price increase? Wouldn't have that been helpful? Would that have allowed you to be more proactive to address the situation, maybe before they even approached you with, hey, I want to take it from $1 to $1.50? Furthermore, if you don't have any information or bad information, or it's not timely, it's not automated, it's not accurate, it's harder for you to dig deep. And whoever can dig deeper into the data and the information, I think comes out in that negotiation process per se, or comes out ahead in that relationship. So if a supplier came to me and said, oh, wait a second, I was paying $1 per part, your raw material costs are up 50%, and I want to charge me $1.50. Why are you charging me $1.50 when raw material is only a portion of that dollar? I understand your raw material costs are up 50%, but when you charge me $1 per part, the raw material that goes into that dollar isn't half, but you're marking up the entire dollar. So shouldn't it be $1.10, $1.20, $1.30 instead of $1.50? Your raw material costs are up 50%. Why are you marking up the entire piece price? So little stuff like that where you could call them out and say, wait a second, this isn't adding up. The problem I'm seeing is that when people graduate from college and they go into these job rotations and they go into job assignments in general, people are staying for shorter amounts of time in those job assignments. So a lot of my students end up in supply chain management. They go into procurement, they're buyers, they spend money, they buy stuff from suppliers. My students are 23, 24, 25 years old, and they're going into jobs where they're dealing with suppliers and their salespeople, and they sit there at the table. The person on the other side of the table on the sales side, that's a sales engineer that's 62 years old, that's been doing that job for 37 years, and they're negotiating a price increase with one of my students that's 23. So when you go into a new job, ask yourself, what's all the information at my disposal? Is it accurate? Is it automated? And is it real time? If they hand you an Excel file that's color coded, just assume it's not updated, it's not accurate, it's not real time, it's not automated. There's probably a bunch of information in here that's just dated and not accurate. So you have to go into a job and say, I want all the information. I want all the information that my supplier's probably looking at, or my customers, along those lines. And then find out the tribal knowledge, the stuff that's not documented. So if you go into a job, who are you replacing? Are you replacing someone that was in that job for 17 years, 7 years? What information and tribal knowledge do they have that you could tap into to better manage your relationships with your suppliers and or customers? So again, I hope that made sense. It's basically going into a job, finding the data and making sense out of it. And some of that data isn't even documented. And again, tribal knowledge is huge. Even at these Fortune 500 companies, when you're going into a job, there were people that did that job previously that goes back 10, 20, 30 years they might have been interacting with the same person that you're going to be interacting with when you meet with that supplier, and that sales engineer is sitting on the other side of the table. So in general, if you have a 23-year-old buying stuff from a supplier and that person on the other side of the table has experience on you, that gives them a competitive advantage. But by just being creative, and I gave you some ideas here on going out there and finding out what information do we have, what don't we have, what is my supplier looking at that I'm not looking at, and then going out there and getting that information. Obviously, if you know you're only going to be in that job assignment for 1 year, you don't have a great incentive to do that kind of legwork because you know you're going to be on your second job assignment after a year. But every job assignment requires deliverables and results. And if you can go into a job assignment with very little work experience and only be there 1 year and generate some serious results and deliverables that previous people haven't been able to deliver, that have been in that job assignment for a longer period of time, that's when you really shine and look like a rock star, and that's at your disposal. Back to my part 1 career advice talk, the ability to go into a job and see everything as a problem to be solved, and then actually able to solve those problems will separate you from the rest. Okay, here's some more career advice from me, and this actually applies to while you're in school. You've heard me talk about things like if you work hard to make great decisions while you're in school, the data shows you're just going to be that much more successful. I mean, there's data that says people that read more make way more money. I've said things like if you keep your grades above a 3.0, can pass a drug test, join clubs related to what you're majoring in, getting work experience related to what you're majoring in, networking, things like that. It all adds up and translates into more success. There's new data that shows there are a bunch of people in the American workforce that are very disengaged. They don't like going to work in the morning, and then when they get to work, they're not engaged. Okay, so what they've determined is the number one differentiating factor between people that are happy and not happy moving forward in life are the ones that go into work and are super engaged versus the ones that are very disengaged. So then they started to study, well, who are these people that like waking up and going to work and feel engaged and have enormous amounts of job satisfaction? So a deal breaker in life is, look, we all have to work. We all should want to work. The key is, can we get a lot of job satisfaction from working? And the people that go into work and feel like they're a part of something and are super engaged are the ones that have the most job satisfaction. The ones that go into work and look at their watch and show up at 8:01 when the day starts at 8 a.m. and they leave at 4:59 when the day ends at 5 p.m. They're looking at their calendar to figure out how many vacation days they have, etc. You will be miserable. There's not a lot of job satisfaction associated with that. So the number one differentiating factor is, are you an engaged member or not? So then they tried to figure out, well, why are these people engaged? Why are they going to work and say, I want to be a part of something and I want to make a difference? I want to know what the value proposition is to our customers. I want to have an impact on that. So the deal breaker is more so than anything else. You would think parents, friends, all that stuff would matter, and it does. The number one factor is, when you were in college, did you have a mentor that pulled you in, that you gravitated towards, and then did you form an emotional attachment to your major, the program, the curriculum, and have relationships with mentors that motivated you and took you to the next level that you otherwise probably wouldn't have taken yourself to? So again, my advice is, when you pick a major, become a part of that program and curriculum. Network with the other students. Become friends with other students. Make that a part of your social life. Build that network, and then gravitate towards faculty, the ones that pull students in and want to help you take your skill sets to the next level. The data, and we're all surprised by this because we didn't understand the impact that a curriculum, major, and faculty could have. That could be the number one reason that you're satisfied moving forward if you're not. So if you go to school, you stumble across a major, you just go to class, you skip class, you don't make friends in your major, you don't develop a network that revolves around those future alumni, and you don't know your faculty, they don't know you, you don't go to their office hours, and you don't seek out mentorship and professional development and growth, chances are you're going to go into the workforce, you're going to be disengaged, it's going to be a job and nothing more, and you're going to dread it and then be less satisfied with the job that's going to spill over into your personal life. The difference there is just find something you can get excited about and then run with it and seek out that mentorship. And that can come from your faculty within your major typically, because chances are that's where we get most of our job satisfaction from, is helping students like that. I often get students in my office showing me their job offers, and we walk through their job offers and we're going through the details. They're excited, they know they're going to accept, et cetera, et cetera. And then we get to the vacation time and it says 10 paid vacation days a year. In other words, 10 days, you can pick work days and you don't have to come in and we will pay you. And most of my students are like, man, I wish that was more, but I guess I can live with that. And some students will say, aren't they legally required to give me more than that? And I say, no, they're not. So the question is, how many paid vacation days is your future employer or current employer legally required to give you? And the answer is, where's that? Zero. Zero. They don't have to give you any. So the going rate for a college grad is 10 paid day vacations. And I'll get students coming to me and say, well, is that negotiable? Because 10 days doesn't sound like a lot. And it's not. It's just the country that we live in where we work and work and work and work even more. If you look at the data, it basically says Americans work more than anyone else in the world, especially amongst industrialized nations. Typically, the way it's set up is with most companies, vacation time is based on seniority. So the more time you have with the company, the more vacation time you get. So for the first 2 years, you might get 10 paid days off a year. And then your third year, that bumps up to maybe 2 more days. Then after another 2 years, most of the people that I know, once they've been with the company 10, 15, 20 years, they tend to peak and cap out at 4 or 5 paid weeks vacation, okay? And you have to work with the same company. Now, when you job hop and you go from an entry-level role to a mid-level role or to an executive role, maybe that becomes a little more negotiable where you say, look, I need this built into the offer, otherwise I can't accept. In general, 10 paid day vacations is the going rate, and it's typically not something that's negotiable, because then if they negotiate that with you, they might have to do it with someone else, and they don't want to go there. So I'm just going to throw that out there, that if you were expecting 15, 20, 25, that you would have a lot of time off when you take these jobs, you won't. It's just the nature of our culture. There is one company that recruits from our program that does 15 days paid right off the bat for our folks for entry-level managerial positions, but that's rare. The going rate is 10. Okay, final point I want to make before I end part 2 of my career advice series is, sometimes I talk so much about supply chain management and I get into the nitty-gritty technical stuff of like inventory and just-in-time and things like that, that I want to circle back and remind you that supply chain management is just being more creative. It's figuring out ways to do things better, faster, and cheaper. It's problem solving. And every company out there and every job out there requires those skill sets. So the people that can go into a job and just figure out how to do things better, faster, and cheaper tend to be the ones that prosper and flourish. To give you some real life examples, for example, John Deere is a Fortune 500 company that designs and builds farm equipment. They tend to do a lot of business with a lot of suppliers that aren't gigantic, that are family-owned businesses, that are minority-owned suppliers, that are female-owned businesses. So what John Deere did a long time ago is they started to figure out is, we love building up these small companies and giving them our business, but when these small companies make parts for us and sell it to us, we're paying a premium, because when they buy the raw material from, say, the mills and other places to build those parts, those metal parts, those plastic parts, those rubber parts, when small companies buy the material to make those parts, they can't buy them in gigantic amounts and get price discounts because they're small companies. So Deere realized, hey, we're paying a premium for these parts because we're doing business with some small suppliers that when they buy this raw material or they buy material from the mills, they're buying them in such low volumes that they're not getting a price discount. So we end up paying more as Deere. So what Deere did is Deere went to the mills and they went to the raw material sources and said, look, we're going to buy this stuff directly from you in gigantic amounts and volumes. And you're going to give us a price discount for that. And you're going to do this for us because we're going to give you long-term business in very large amounts. And we're going to take that discount that we get and share it with our suppliers so that when they make the parts for us, we get them at a cheaper price. We're basically splitting the cost savings with our suppliers. So it's win-win. You're building up your suppliers, they're getting bigger and more successful. You're helping them actually widen their margins, but you're paying less per part. So you're also making more money because a $1 cost savings is equivalent to $1 worth of pre-tax profit. So large companies buying material on behalf of their smaller suppliers collectively and getting economies of scale and price discounts, that's just basically doing things more creatively, doing things better, faster, and cheaper. Another ridiculous example is UPS and deliveries in general. What they finally figured out was when you're getting those packages and they're delivering stuff, making left turns is expensive. Think about a left turn when you're driving. You have to stop, you have to sit there, you have to wait, you're burning fuel, and then it takes longer. So imagine if you can create an algorithm. An algorithm is just a fancy way of saying fancy math program. An algorithm that tells the drivers, we've come out with a route for you today that reduces the number of left-hand turns and increases the number of right-hand turns. So that basically you do things better, faster, and cheaper. So what does a truck route look like that doesn't have any left-hand turns and has only right-hand turns, which technically, mathematically, is possible if you know what the routes are for the day? I think you could technically maybe avoid any and all left-hand turns. It's basically a spiral that looks like this. Okay, no left-hand turns, just a bunch of right-hand turns. That's just doing things more creatively. How can I do this better, faster, and cheaper? They've saved millions in fuel and customers get their stuff faster and they can get more product to customers. So that right there is just supply chain management, doing things better, faster, and cheaper. Last example is you hear about these computer chip shortages, in particular in the auto industry. And this is kind of what happened is at the beginning of COVID, everyone thought the economy was going to tank and sales forecasts were slashed. Of course they were. We thought, okay, everyone's in lockdown, everyone's at home, this is going to be a long time, and a bunch of people are going to lose their jobs. So of course people aren't going to buy cars and trucks, right? Well, in reality, what happened was the lockdown didn't last forever. Even during the lockdown, most people didn't lose their jobs. Even the people that lost their jobs, they got their jobs back. So what happened was at the beginning of COVID, once we got out of the lockdown in March, April of 2020, people started buying a bunch of stuff like cars and trucks, and they changed their lifestyles. And instead of going to restaurants and public events, they bought video game consoles, they started gaming, they started exercising at home. In other words, they started buying stuff that required computer chips. So in the auto industry, GM, Ford, Chrysler, Honda, Toyota, they actually don't buy a lot of computer chips directly themselves. They buy stuff from suppliers who buy stuff from suppliers who buy the computer chips from the chip plants. And those first, second, and third tier suppliers that buy the computer chips that end up in our cars and trucks are smaller suppliers that don't buy chips in huge amounts. Okay, so they don't get great prices to begin with. And what happened was the automotive OEMs at the beginning of COVID said, here are our new sales forecasts. Car and truck sales will be down 50%, so we're going to buy 50% less stuff from you. Well, the chip plants are looking at these sales orders and saying, wait a second, auto industry? I'm booming with business. I can't keep up with it because now I have these new industries that I'm going into because people are at home working remotely and exercising and playing video games. So the auto industry came back and said, look, we changed our forecasts again and car and truck sales are through the roof. The chip industry said, too bad, what can I do? Like your first, second, and third tier suppliers aren't even big customers for us anymore because we have these new customers in these new industries and we do more business with them than your first and second tier suppliers. So how do you solve that problem? And yep, we don't have chips for our vehicles. The cars and trucks are sitting in the lots because they're not finished or we can't even go into production. So what they did was GM and Ford said, for example, chip plants, chip companies will buy the chips from you directly. We will buy gigantic amounts. We will pay a price and we'll do it for a long period of time. And even if car and truck sales go down, we don't need the chips, we'll still pay for them and buy them, and we'll sit on them and keep it as inventory. And the chip industry said, now we're talking. So the automotive OEMs, and Toyota did this before the problem actually happened, is they're buying the chips and then selling them to their first, second, and third tier suppliers so that there will always be a supply. And actually they might get better prices that way long term because they're buying them in bulk and giving these chip plants long-term contracts. So again, that's just doing things more creatively. Oddly enough, an auto company that prospered kind of during COVID was Tesla. And that's because Tesla, right before COVID, a lot of suppliers wouldn't give Tesla the time of day because they were really, really small and they didn't know if Tesla was in it for the long term. So Tesla really struggled to get material it needed to design and build vehicles. So if you can't get people to do it for you, what do? You do it yourself. So Tesla actually is kind of highly vertically integrated for an automotive OEM. They didn't see COVID coming. They weren't super proactive. They didn't do anything genius. They did it in response to, yeah, this auto supply chain thing, they're not giving us the attention we deserve. We're trying to scale this and build this up. And we can't get them to give us more parts because they're too busy supplying Toyota and Volkswagen and General Motors. So for example, Tesla said, yep, we're going to buy the chips directly ourselves. And they did this way before COVID. And when you send us the chips, leave them blank. We have our own software design engineers. They'll code it and we'll stick it into our vehicles and we'll send it to some of our first tier suppliers. So it's just by chance that Tesla bought chips directly, bought the chips kind of blank, had their own software design engineers that actually are Tesla employees versus GM and Ford outsourcing that stuff. When you outsource, you lose control. During COVID, a lot of these OEMs that did a lot of outsourcing that weren't highly vertically integrated, they didn't have tons of control where they could control the supply lines to the extent that more vertically integrated companies could. If you look at companies like UPS and Amazon and Walmart, the reason they did well during COVID was they were pretty highly vertically integrated. Walmart has its own warehouses. They don't outsource that. Walmart has its own drivers, its own containers. Amazon has its own facilities, all that stuff. So Tesla for automotive, for OEM, they're kind of highly vertically integrated and they didn't have these same supply line issues as the more less vertically integrated companies did. Toyota is not vertically integrated, but they've had so many natural disasters that when they see something happen like COVID, they're fine with building up inventories because they assume the worst will happen. And the worst did happen with computer chips. Toyota in general kind of didn't run out of computer chips because they agreed at the beginning when chips were plentiful and cheap, like in March of 2020, they bought a stockpile on it and said, worst case, we have an inventory of computer chips, but otherwise we'll have this and no one else will. So people will be able to buy our products. Maybe they jack up their prices because the other competitors didn't have product available. So I just want to throw that out there is, again, just being creative, doing things better, faster, and cheaper. Pretty much any business story you read, it has something to do with supply chain management.